I'm Nilmini Rubin. I'm Chief Policy Officer at Hedera. I've spent the last 25 years in Washington, D.C., working at the Treasury Department, the Senate, the House, the White House, and in big tech. And I'm delighted to be working with you all at Hedera. I have a really interesting panel here today. We have, in Washington, D.C., there are a lot of associations. There are so many associations, there's actually an association for associations. And of those many associations, the association that Kristen Smith has built, the Blockchain Association, rises to the top. So we are really delighted that she is here to talk to us about what's been happening in Washington. And alongside her is Kristi Swartz, who is a partner at DeLay Piper and known to many of us as the co-chair of the GovCom committee, and is famous worldwide as really the person who wrote the rules for Vera in Dubai, one of the leading regulators of digital assets. And she's sought by many around the world to help them develop their rules for their own countries. So we are really delighted to have both of them here. I'm going to start with Kristen. What happened with the election, and what was the contribution of the crypto industry to the results, with President Trump winning the presidency, with the Senate going to the Republicans, and the House getting a very narrow margin for Republicans? What was crypto's contribution to that election result?
Yeah, no, I think an earthquake is a good way to describe it. I thought Trump was going to win, but I was kind of blown away by how strong it was. It's not very often in Washington that you get a trifecta where one party controls the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so regardless of the issue, that is a recipe for things moving and getting enacted into law, just as if you had the Democrats in the same position. I think what's fascinating about crypto is that if you look over the past 3.5, 4 years, the industry has really been boxed into a corner, mostly by the SEC, but also the banking regulators and others. And some of that has resulted into a flight to friendlier jurisdictions overseas, but as an industry, there was a real sort of decision, and it sort of happened organically. I don't think everyone got in a room and decided this, but a decision to engage politically at a level that not just crypto had seen before, but any industry had seen before. This is the most aggressive political engagement I have ever seen on behalf of any industry, using lawful tools that other industries had shied away from using. And so there was about $134 million spent as independent expenditures in races for candidates all across the country. Of the 58 primary races, which were roughly divided between Republicans and Democrats, I think so far there have only been 2 losses. I think I have to do the math. I think there's like 56 confirmed wins and then 2 kind of races that we're waiting for the results on. But that is reverberated through Washington. I mean, people know that, if you're strong with crypto will be there for you. I think most notably 40 million of that 134 million went to take out the sitting chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, which is like unheard of. And so these are really, really strong political moves. And as a result, I think, we're going to be heading into working with the most pro-crypto Congress that's ever existed. Whatever you think about Trump, we're about to head into the most pro-crypto administration that's ever existed. And I've been spending a lot of my week, and Nilmini is very familiar with this, but, a lot of it's going to come down to the personnel who are in key regulatory positions. Is there a crypto czar created at the White House? Et cetera. But I think, going forward, the political winds have completely shifted. It is actually bipartisan in Congress. And so going forward, we're going to be in a position, to ask for changes. I think the challenge is going to be, can we get the industry unified as to what they want? But that's a question for a different day. We certainly can't complain about the environment we have to make make progress on the policy front.
Kristi, while the U.S. has been lagging the last few years and not moving forward with any bills into law, not really having regulation by enforcement, the rest of the world has been moving forward. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what countries are actually the leaders in this and why are they leading? Like what made them different?
Sure. So I'm going to give a little bit of background about myself. I'm originally from Texas via London to Hong Kong and spend a lot of time now in Dubai. As Nilmini mentioned, full disclosure, I still do quite a bit of work for VARA. So of course, I'm going to say VARA is, in my opinion, the jurisdiction which has got the most progressive laws, regulations, rule books, guidance around digital assets, not just crypto. And some people would say, of course, you would say that, Kristi, because of course you wrote them, and of course. But I think what we've done from difference from a Hong Kong construct in Dubai is that we have actually got an end-to-end, like a whole ecosystem developed. I would say Hong Kong, Singapore, probably not terribly behind. They have a lot of rules, a lot of regulations in place, but it's not necessarily the whole ecosystem. Like we have a VATP licensing regime in Hong Kong, which is only on spot. Not terribly exciting, not much going on. The SFC has actually kind of done a little bit of a backtrack as well. Singapore is focusing mostly on payments, if I may say so, not terribly much on the virtual asset space. So we've got that in place. It's been in place in VARA for about 18 months in Dubai. And we're starting to move on. We're moving on to things like, so you think you own the IP, and I basically say, Kristi owns IBM, and I put it on the blockchain. What are you going to do on disputes? What are you going to do in the actual operational phase of? So we're not talking like the regulatory space anymore. We're moving on to what do you do in disputes? Does it need to be in the contracts with your clients? Mandating arbitration in a certain place, because in Dubai, for instance, you've got onshore regulation. Doesn't appeal to a lot of people. So do we want to basically move on to that? Again, going back to the example of Kristi owns IBM, it's immutable. I put it on the blockchain. I say I own it. Well, what do we do about that? Kristi can't basically take it back now. If IBM says, Kristi, take it back, what do you do? So we're moving on to look at things that are important in the grand scheme of things, but maybe, like I said, more on the operational side. The custody space is a very interesting one as well. We've written 3 previous custody rule books around custodian, because custodian is a regulated activity in Dubai. So we've looked at things like, can you stake from custody? Can you now look at settlement from custody? And I think May's question before was, I said, oh, pick me, I'll answer that question, because I basically have looked a lot around some of the models and some of the things being offered from the custodians in Dubai, because we're looking at things that will make the ecosystem better, but also trying to look at consumer protection, of course, AML KYC being foremost as a regulator. But we're also basically trying to create a better system to make people not just want to come there, but to expand. So in some ways, I would say that Dubai, of course, is the most progressive. I think it is by example. But I do think, there's some other jurisdictions. I think MiCA 2.0 is coming on board. A little bit, I think, controversial. Some people are not terribly happy about it. Very confusing in other aspects. Some bits of it can't be really deciphered. So some people have come to us and said, can you look at these parts, because we're not really even sure what this means. So I think in that respect, where VARA will basically kind of reign supreme in Dubai, looking at things on what they had to do. I think it was said this morning, after COVID, the D33, basically, Dubai had to figure out what they were going to do as an economy. And I think it was a very clever thing, because when we were basically asked to do this project, a lot of people said, are you sure you want to be identified with this? And I said, yeah, of course I do. I'd love to be identified with this. But some people said, oh, it's a really risky project. What if it all goes pear-shaped? And everyone laughs and says, oh, that was a really bad thing to have done. I said, I'd like to do it anyway. And luckily, DLA stood with me and said, fine, let's do it. But I think, hindsight now, looking back, everyone says, yeah, of course it was a great thing to do. Look what happened. But at the time when we were doing it, I'm not so sure a lot of people felt the same way. So maybe I'll stop there, Nilmini, and say, I think, there's places doing it better. I somewhat disagree, I think, with earlier speakers on saying that the United States is at least at a state level, kind of making its way through. I'm not really sure I feel that that's the same, because when we did the 34 jurisdiction benchmarking for VAR's regulations, we looked at here's what you should really be looking at doing. Here's some maybe good practice, some good examples, and here's not what to do. And I have to say, what not to do was what the US was basically at the time considering, because the SEC was going crazy. You know, the great thing in Dubai, again, is it doesn't matter if it's an animal, vegetable or mineral. If it's a virtual asset, it's regulated. So we don't have to have this conversation in that context. So I think we've done a fairly good job at figuring out what to do with it. And now we're going on to the next phase, as I said, to kind of move on to the operational procedural issues and what we need to think of on the big picture to make this a very vibrant ecosystem.
Thank you. You mentioned the SEC. So Kristen, the SEC has been a monster in many people's nightmares. And I was wondering if you could tell us what to expect with an SEC where there may be changes.
Yeah, well, I think there's the before Gary's gone and after Gary's gone, right? And I don't know, I was receiving some notes even as I was walking in here that I think there's some sort of Gensler surprise I might wake up to when I get back to my phone here. But, I think in the short term, we could certainly see more enforcement actions coming out of the SEC. I mean, we're even looking at any sort of legal. Yeah.
I think that's surprising. Tell us why.
I think that they believe they're right and that they're, I don't know, but yeah, I don't think we've seen the end of it. So that, there's two things essentially the SEC could do, right? They can do additional enforcement actions. And we know that there are a lot of companies in the crypto digital asset space that have received Wells notices. I've heard, at least from one organization, well, two organizations, I guess, that have had fresh outreach since the election from the SEC on issues that they thought were long dormant. And so, yeah, I think we could see some actions happening before he's gone. The second one is, of course, rulemaking. I think that's actually less likely. There's a couple open rulemakings at the SEC right now, the exchange rulemaking, the safeguarding rulemaking. Those could go final. And as written, I think they're problematic. I think there's some recourse on both fronts next year. I think for any open enforcement actions, there may be an opportunity to settle under different leadership. Not guaranteed by any means. Those could continue to play out, but there may be more receptiveness to coming up with some sort of solution to dismiss of some of that litigation. I do think we could see a stay on any new registration enforcement actions until we, get some more rules in place. If there are rulemakings that happen, there's a couple tools there. One which has been the only tool usually available to us as an industry has been to challenge the regulation. And I think that if anything does go final, we could expect to see challenges there. I do think there's also this unique tool that Congress has called the Congressional Review Act that would be very easy for a Republican Senate, House, White House to do. But basically any law that goes final, they have 60 legislative days for Congress any rule that goes final, the Congress can vote within 60 days to pull it back. So that would be an option there. But I think the more interesting thing is, what could the SEC proactively do to be helpful? I think there are some rulemakings they could undertake. One, they could just do a request for information and take a survey of everything that's going on. But there's some exemptive relief I think that they could provide. There are no action letters. I think, if you have a world where Mark Ueda's chairman or at least acting chairman for a while and Hester Peirce is given a little staff to go and solve crypto, that would be an amazing opportunity to get some rules so we don't have to be in this constant regulation by enforcement posture.
Over 15 years ago, I wrote an amendment for Senator Lugar to Dodd-Frank, and it just got implemented this year. So I'm really well aware of how long things take with the SEC. And the way that we pushed the SEC was through legislation. And when we look at the Hill, there's a lot of rejoicing in crypto that the Republicans have taken control of two chambers. Do the Democrats still matter?
Absolutely, they matter. I think that any legislation that works through Congress, we want to have strong bipartisan support. Because if we don't, then when everything flips and it's the other way around, we're going to open it up and it's all going to be, revisited. And I think what we want is not only like appropriate regulation, but we also want very, lasting and permanent regulation, right? We don't want it to ping pong every time there's a shift in power. And so, no, I think you absolutely have to have full Democratic buy-in and make sure that all the issues they have, if they do differ, I mean, they actually rarely don't. The only issue we've had over the past couple of years is Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren. If you take them out of the picture, it's actually like a pretty balanced and bipartisan issue.
Let's say the United States gets its act together, legislation gets passed. Kristi, is there any chance we can catch up with the rest of the world? And if we do, will the United States be able to have its scale on crypto match its prowess as a country?
Well, I think let's be honest. If you're going to ask, I'm only the lawyer to many of the VASPs and others who basically are applying for this licensing. But if you say, can you give me, I'm just going to pick on Malta. You give me Malta or you give me the United States as being regulatory certain. Of course, people are going to say, yes, I'd rather be in the United States. I'd rather spend my efforts. I think the problem the United States has actually gotten itself into is, I use the analogy as they've kind of gotten there, and you don't want to basically, if your business, to dip your toe in and say, if the US government says it's too hot or too cold, they run the other way. Or as Kristen was just saying, if you basically have change in thoughts or leadership that's going to move. So I think people are going to be very cautious before they look to move substantial business, because I think you're still seeing migration out. The reason people are coming to Dubai, say Singapore or even Hong Kong for part of their business is because there is regulatory certainty, and the governments, as you know, mostly in Asia, once they say something, it's they don't want egg on their face on basically retracting. So they're just going to pivot slightly, like Singapore did, and said, we're maybe a little bit more interested in payments than crypto, say, or virtual assets. So I think the fact is, but if you're there, you're there. And if the license has been granted, they're not going to take it away. And I think enforcement is not very high on the list then once they've given licenses. So I do think if you look at the, kind of balance of it, people are looking to say they want to be in the US because, the world is better with the US, player, US licensing. But I think to say that you're going back and putting things in the TradFi space and that's the only place you can put it, I'm not really sure that you're going to be progressing, nor will probably the industry be looking to say that's acceptable. When McHenry came to Abu Dhabi, we met with them. I did with Vara, and it was a bipartisan group that came. This was about maybe getting on to almost 10 months ago. The aspect of it is they were asking interesting questions. They were saying, do you think the U.S. is losing jobs to this? And I said, yeah, certainly. Look at, for instance, when Dubai announced the regulations that would be coming in force before we even were given the luxury of the 9 months to draft it all. You had people announcing they were going to Dubai. Then now as a result of it, you've got things like Binance having their headquarters in Dubai, 700 people later. And that's not just the 700 people who work for Binance, it's their families, other people, grandparents, whatever, coming along as well. That's just to mention one of the 22 licensed entities that they've been able to get licensed in the past 18 months. So I think it is, in all fairness, an economic issue for the states as well. So do you want the business or do you want it to go elsewhere? And I think, like I said, I think people are going to be quite cautionary, even if there's a change, even if there's new regulation that comes in tomorrow, if it's ready, which I think it's going to take some time. We're always being told, even if there's a new, or at least there's an agreement amongst Democrats and Republicans, it's going to be 2 to 3 years before the U.S. could do anything with that. That means, thankfully, VAR has been in existence for almost 5-6 years, and they would have basically captured probably all the ones that they want to capture at that juncture. So is it impossible? No, the U.S. is a very vibrant, resilient place. I think it will eventually get there. It's just about, then when you look, say, I've now managed to be in Europe, I've now managed to be in Middle East, I've now managed to be in Asia. Can I basically run my operations and offer my services to U.S. clients without having to be in the U.S.? I mean, I guess that's a big part of the equation. Or maybe I have a much smaller, base from which I offer those services because of the regulatory uncertainty. So if I have to pull and run, then I can do it, which is not being American, being Texan really, but being American, I think that's actually a quite sad state of reality is the fact that we can't kind of get it together to get people to say, look, this is really about the economics of what this industry can really bring to the United States.
I could ask endless questions. I'm going to take 2 questions from the audience if there are any, and I'll put them together and then ask our panelists. So, Brett?
I'd love to hear from both panelists from little different perspectives, U.S. international, on this question. We don't want to waste this opportunity of having the most pro-crypto U.S. policy government ever. If you were writing the roadmap from worst to first, what is on the checklist? What do we have to push through both the legislative process and the regulatory process to feel like the U.S. is now back on top when it comes to enabling this particular industry? Not back on top, but on top, enabling this industry. Is it just the FIT bill and the stablecoin bill, or what is really on that to-do list that would bring us there?
Okay, so Brett's question is, what are the priorities, legislative and regulatory, to get the U.S. on top? And are there any other questions? Okay, that's what we got. Kristen?
Yeah, no, I think if you ask different actors, you'll get different answers. But I do think that there is a gap in how to regulate dollar-backed stablecoin issuers. So we need to put a regime in there. I think that there is likely a need to find a regulator for the cash markets for crypto assets. Typically commodities, cash markets aren't regulated at the federal level, but people feel differently when it comes to digital assets. And so I think we need to fill a gap there. But the hard one, and this I think is unique to the US, I don't think other people have this. It's, as you will know, it's figuring out when something is a commodities transaction or a securities transaction. And that is one where there is still, I think, a tremendous amount of disagreement within the industry on how to approach that. And so I think, getting, some way for, issuers of new tokens and new projects to have some registration and a pathway for them to raise money to do so. I think that's important. But, we also have ongoing litigation. If we do have 2 markets, we need to know, which market is, which regulator applies. And that is a question that there's just not consensus on how to do that. And that's the one where I think, we're trying to get people surrounded or, take an inventory and figure out where everyone's at. But that's the one that's the hardest issue to solve.
I think, in my opinion, this whole issue around, and I understand it's because you've got 2 different regulators who say, I want this, or maybe it's a turf war. I think you've got to basically have some agreement or understanding about who's going to regulate this first and what it looks like. To some extent, like I said, the VARA way of which we basically managed to do this, I don't really care if it's security or a commodity. It's regulated. If we can take that approach and say, okay, it's regulated, who's going to regulate it? I think that's the first thing the U.S. needs to look at. I'm not suggesting, but it would be great, because I've actually even suggested this in Hong Kong, to have something like a VARA to say you need somebody who knows the industry, knows what virtual assets, what crypto is, what the difference between DLT, the different things that run on it. So I really feel that when I hear about animal, vegetable, mineral, that's how I always describe it, because I said, I don't really care. The fact is it's regulated. Now then I can look at it, is it light touch regulated? NFTs. Do I need to really, I don't know, maybe I don't need to regulate NFTs so much, but maybe, light touch and heavier touch. If you're an exchange, maybe that's actually something that needs to be a lot more regulated than, let's say, if I'm issuing an NFT. So from my perspective, I think that's the first thing coming in. I am American. I am not US qualified. So I find this a bit of a rabbit, you go down the hole, like going, my gosh, I don't understand why we've had this conversation. It doesn't need to be this difficult. The second point, I think, too, is the enforcement point. I think Kristen's made mention of it. Others have made mention of it. You need to basically figure out what it is, enforce, and get over with it, because I think you're not going to find anybody, again, too willing or wanting to invest a lot of time, effort, and money if you think you're going to, especially if you're coming from overseas and looking to say, I'm looking at the United States as my market. Nobody's going to be particularly interested on, we just are getting started on those backlog of enforcement notices that we thought we'd get to now that we've got a new government maybe coming in, because that scares the bejeebers out of people because it lasts a long time and costs a lot of money. And I think, again, if I had to basically do the way up and when we're advising people saying, oh, well, here's the regulatory piece, here's what it costs to get licensed, but you need to basically have this big, never-ending pot of gold, HBAR, whatever, for contingency in case you get a Wells notice. And I don't think anybody particularly finds that appetizing. And I don't think any other jurisdiction looks at it that way, by the way. And I think the fact that the US makes it very political is a bit of a pity, again, because I don't think that many people view this. I mean, for instance, we were, again, in charge of putting the enforcement together for VARA. The fines as well. The fines are pretty hefty, I might say. But the fact is, if you get done doing something that's wrong or you shouldn't be doing, guess what? You get fined. Okay, that's acceptable, I suppose, because it's a bit of a wrongdoing that you're getting fined for. You first get the ability to rectify it. Again, a lot different than saying, well, I think you basically have violated, our SEC rules on securities, and therefore I'm coming after you. It doesn't really help the business. It doesn't help the United States look. It doesn't help anything. So I think from my perspective, the last thing I would say is, I know it's very difficult, but again, when we're advising people on the fact that you may have to go state by state to get licensed in every state, that to me, structurally, it may not be possible, but you need to have some consolidation or some sort of agreement as to how the licensing and regulatory remit's going to happen, because it's virtually impossible once you start in one place. You're 5-10 years later still waiting to get licensed in all 50 states, and do you really need it? Don't know, but it's very costly. It's very confusing, and I think the fact is, what you get on the other side is maybe not as satisfactory now as what you're seeing some other jurisdictions being able to offer. I see, as I say, Monique's got a very interesting.
Last question, Monique.
Last question. So, this is a great discussion, by the way, but this is for the three of you. What should be done concretely in the next 3-6 months? Let's just say in the United States specifically, what needs to be done concretely? We've heard all kind of the barriers. We've heard great examples of barrier. But what needs to be done now concretely? I think there could be some barriers this time, as I know, some of you, I don't know directly. I'm on the board. It would be great to understand.
Okay. So the question is, what are the concrete actions that we should take in the United States? So this will be our last lightning round. So, Kristen, what needs to get done now?
Yeah, you mean from an industry perspective or policy perspective? Okay. Well, okay. So from a policy perspective, I think there's some short-term things that can happen. The attitude at the top matters, and having a clear direction that we want the U.S. to be the crypto capital of the world is in and of itself valuable. I think there's some short-term things that can be done around sending a strong signal to the banking regulators to make it clear to the banks to not debank a lawful industry. I think that the SEC can very easily rescind the SAB 121 guidance that is keeping the banks out of it. And I think having, some sort of signal that, hey, we got a position, we got somebody here in the White House who's going to work on this and be dedicated to this would send a strong signal. And then the legislative and regulatory processes will take time. I think, at the CFTC, I think we'll see rulemakings around DeFi. I think we'll see rulemakings around prediction markets. The SEC, I think they're going to try to collect all of the best ideas out there in an open process. And so I think what the industry needs to do is participate in these opportunities. But I really do think we need to get the industry together and figure out, okay, we're all here. We don't all like each other. That's okay. But we're here, and we need to figure out, how can we come up with some ideas as an industry that we can be unified around and not take those fights to court, because we saw this with Fit 21. We saw it with others. People take ideas directly to Congress. They start the ball rolling. By the time you get to a markup or a vote, the other half of the industry reads the bill and they're like, oh, wait, we don't like that. And it's like, okay, guys, but this is the window. This is the golden window. This is a $134 million window. Like, this is a once in a lifetime political opportunity. And so we need to be on the same page and support each other's needs, because we're all here and we're not going away. And that I think is going to be the hard part.
Kristi?
Someone should start an organization to do that.
I was just going to say, I think the industry is a call to action. I think every single person in this room needs to basically, the first 100 days are going to be really important. And I think it needs to be a very strong, hard push. I think everyone basically needs to do their part in making sure something, gets said through whatever means, however it needs to get said, because I'm learning a lot about the government, which I should know about already. But, I was being told, if you don't get it done in the first 2 years, you're not going to maybe get the next two. So I think, first 100 days are pretty important here.
So I would, I agree with everything they said. And I'm a firm believer that it has to be done in 2 years. You can never count on 4. But I would look at people, policy, and products. And so people is the confirmation process that we're going through now. Senior level positions need to be confirmed by the Senate. And the confirmation process is not just majority rules, it's 60 votes. And so you do need to work with both sides to get them through. And it's going to be really important because they're going to set the tone for the administration. The last administration, Kristen invited the deputy secretary to speak at her event, her summit. And the deputy secretary, Wally Ademayo, said to the group, your industry is a threat to national security. Well, that's insidious, and that creeps into the staff. So you really are going to need to unwind that throughout, not just Treasury, but the other pieces of the national security establishment. So working on the confirmation process, working with the senators to ask questions that we support, to move to make it clear to people who are confirmed that we care about this and this matters, is going to be really important. Just doing basic things like unraveling restrictions on staff from even holding crypto. Which is like impossible. How do they know how things work? How can they regulate it when it's like legal and they're not able to own it or use it? And then on the policy side, getting stablecoin and market structure legislation through immediately, as well as working with the SEC on the regulation authority. And then the final is products, and thinking about how, as an industry, we can work with the administration to integrate our technology into what they're doing. So it's not just that they support us in like doing our own thing, but they think about how to make government more efficient and effective using our technology, which we all know would make it more effective and efficient. So anyway, I would like to thank our panelists, Kristen and Kristi, for coming down to talk to us today. And thank you all for your great questions.